Hey guys, Original Hansdog here to give you some ideas about which starting weapons might be right for you or your group in Albion Online. There are advantages and disadvantages to every weapon in the game, and playing to your strengths is extremely important depending on your weapon. I'll be going over multiple builds and discussing the advantages and disadvantages of certain weapons and builds, as well as explaining general costs associated. This guide will mostly focus on more readily available builds and a way to start into certain trees rather than a perfect meta build that will cost you an arm and a leg and will be unobtainable for most newer players. I'll go ahead and get right into it with one of my personal favorites, the double-bladed staff. Now, the double-bladed staff is one of the highest mobility weapons in the entirety of Albion, and it is often used in ganking, gathering, escaping, transporting, and several other kind of niche things that it can do to not only escape people, but also just have high mobility in certain situations. Now, the reason why the Fiend Cowl is paired with this ganking build is because the Purge can purge their boots, as well as many of their other buffs that can both leave you vulnerable, as well as help them escape you. Now, with this, if you time things correctly, it's pretty much impossible for them to get away from you, and it's very, very handy for ganking, as well as many other fighting situations. Now, the Stalker Jacket that is in this build is here for extra damage. It's also very good in a lot of different melee builds and a lot of different PvE builds. Some weapons, like the Quarterstaff, won't do as much damage as certain other weapons, so sometimes you kind of need to bring something like a Stalker Jacket along to balance it out, to make it do enough damage to effectively clear PvE or PvP with. Now, the Soldier Boots are in this combo because they're one of the highest mobility boots in the game. They do take a while to tick up, so usually you would want to use your mobility buttons that are built into your weapon to create some distance first to make it harder for them to purge you and to eventually chase you down. Now, the Soldier Boots do have a long cooldown, so that's just something to note. One of the really common swaps for this build is the Hunter Shoes. The Hunter Shoes are a lot faster initially, but they don't last nearly as long. They also increase the CC that you do, so they're an excellent thing to pair with something like a Quarterstaff. Now, just as a side note here as well, the double-bladed is not the best of all things in quarterstaffs. It is the best for ganking, but things like the basic quarterstaff and the Phantom Twin Blade will be much better for PvP and PvE clearing. The Phantom Twin Blade is extremely expensive though, and you're likely not going to want to spend millions of silver early on just on one or two weapons, so I would definitely avoid it until you level up the rest of your quarterstaff. Up next, we'll be going over another one of my personal favorites, the Bear Paws. The Bear Paws are kind of a unique blend of damage and mobility. They aren't necessarily the best at either one, but they can usually stand up to people's similar IP, and they also have a lot of ability to escape and move around and dodge attacks. Now, one of the abilities, Rending Rage, is an extremely important one that you actually will not get until you have 85 in your Axe Mastery. This is kind of an important thing to note because you will not be at your optimal ganking potential until you get that. Now, some of the other abilities, they also help with movement. The W and the E are both movement abilities. This one also has the Fiend Cowl, which was explained in the previous build, so I won't go too far into it on this one. Now, the Assassin Jacket is unique in that it lets you go invisible for a period of time. It also builds damage stacks while you're invisible, so that when you come out, you can deal a lot more damage for a short period of time. Now, this build can also go with the Soldier's Boots, but usually people go with the Royal Sandals for the damage buff and the faster cooldown. The damage buff that comes from the Royal Sandals also makes you more vulnerable, so it's kind of important just to note that you shouldn't activate it right before your enemy dumps all of their damage. Just like with quarterstaffs, there are axes that are better for certain PvP situations and are better for PvE. The battle axe is a good cheap option, but there are some really good expensive options as well, like the Realmbreaker and the new Crystal Axe. But it just depends on the situation. The Bear Paws are definitely the best for ganking. Now on to daggers. So we're going to be going over a one-handed dagger build. Just before we go into things too much, just some side things to note. There are some other good dagger options, like for instance the Bloodletter for escaping and mobility, and then also the Death Givers for damage and 1v1 fighting. Now, the Death Givers are extremely good, but they are extremely expensive, and the Bloodletter does have high mobility, but it lacks in almost everything else. So one of the entire focuses around the one-handed dagger basically revolves around its E. You steal 100% of the health that you deal while using the E, however, it also damages you for 4% of your max health as true damage for every 1 second that you have it activated. It takes a while to master, but it is extremely good at PvE clearing. It can often punch up in PvE clearing, and you used to be able to solo clear group dungeons quite easily with the one-handed dagger. Now, I've included the Assassin's Hood with it because you can use your channel and refresh your E faster. It will allow you to get back to stealing your enemy's health more quickly and is very, very usable in a lot of different situations. Now, the Hunter Jacket is also very important because it increases your attack speed. The Torch as well that comes with this build will also increase your attack speed. So you can stack those two together and use the E to basically go from like 10% health to 100% in a matter of just a couple of seconds. Now, I also included the Soldier's Boots. You kind of know the deal at this point. They have really high mobility. They're really good for escaping. They're really just good in a lot of open world builds and early builds. Daggers have several viable options for several different types of content. The double daggers have great burst damage, while the claws are great for ganking and locking somebody down. The Death Givers are great for 1v1s and 2v2s. It all really just depends on what you're doing. For our next weapon, we'll be changing things up pretty significantly with our first ranged weapon, the one-shot crossbow or normal crossbow. There's a few things about the crossbow that make it really good, but generally speaking, the burst damage is what everybody's looking for, and this one has a lot of it. The Demon Helmet is really important in this build because it actually gives you a silence with your auto attack. The Scholar Robe is also very important because it increases your cast time, which is extremely important for your Sunder shot as well as your aim shot. Just like with the Soldier's Boots before, I've explained the Royal Sandals already. They are really important and really good in this build though. As you guys can see, I've put quite a bit of time into crossbows. The one-handed crossbow and the bolt casters specifically are two crossbows that I did not show off that are really good in small group play and solo play. The one-handed crossbow in particular is extremely good at PvE and is used in a lot of the highest tier content in the game. This next build is one I fear the most in the open world, the Gank Tank or one-handed Gank Mace build. This build has a few things going for it. The Judicator helmet releases a large electric ring that stuns everyone around it. The Graveguard armor shoots out a hook that pulls the target back towards you and does damage. And the boots are extremely fast and increase CC duration. The maces have a lot of other good options as well, like the Incubus for PvE or the Oathkeepers for PvP, but it all just depends on the situation. This next build is one that is near and dear to many people's hearts in Albion. This build used to be capable of soloing almost every piece of content that Albion had to offer. The Mage Cowl allows you to do more damage, and it being cloth also gives you more passive damage. The Mercenary Jacket allows you to health steal every time you do damage for a limited period of time. The Soldier's Boots, you guys know. And then the Mist Collar offhand actually decreases cooldowns. It's a very useful build. Like with the other weapons in the game, there are some really useful additional options within the nature tree. The Iron Root is one of my personal favorites and is great for 2v2s. There are several others that are really good for ZVZ and some other content as well. Now, to finish off the list strong, we have a Carving Sword build. The Carving Sword has everything from movement to catches built in, and is a great build for many situations. I've included the Fiend Cowl, Assassin Jacket, and Soldier Boots that I've discussed earlier in this video, and they have a lot of advantages to them. There are much better Carving Sword builds out there, but many of them cost an arm and a leg. This one's more affordable and accessible to most players. Swords also have some other viable options, like cheap, effective dual swords, the former top 2v2 meta Claymore, and the Clarent Blade, but they all just excel at certain different things. In conclusion, there are a lot of choices and even weapon trees that I didn't cover at all in Albion. I have used each of these builds at different points in time or on different servers and accounts. I really wanted to include more, but obviously there's only so much time in the day and so much space. I will be going over other builds in separate videos to come in the future. And I will also be explaining a lot of additional Albion content in additional videos in the future. Thank you all for watching, and you know what to do if you like the video. Appreciate it.